You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowing like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Deku Enters Fate's Stay Night? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of bubbajack on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Flying was a new experience for Izuku. Yet he found it overall to be an enjoyable and exhilarating experience. The wind wiping through his green mess of hair as he and Tatsumaki soared through the skies, while the people on the ground looked like ants from above was going to be something he would never forget. He even let out a little whoop. They swerved in between buildings. Having fun? Tatsumaki asked, though she could clearly glean her answer from the look on his face. This is great. The reply warmed the Esper's usually cold heart. In truth, she was overjoyed. Be it the hand of fate or something else, that she was able to be a part of her sister's life again and her nephew's now. The two were racing through the skies, turning an hour-long overly full train ride into a joyous experience for them both. They were also moving faster than any train could hope to move. So you do this all the time? He asked, a psychic barrier protecting him from any fast-moving particulates in the air. Yeah. After all, why get on a cramped train when you can go wherever whenever like this? He nodded, understanding and accepting her reasoning, yet he couldn't help but inquire, what about the anti-quirk law? This earned him a dismissive snort from his newly begotten relative. The law wasn't in place when I was a hero. I had no reason to not fly, and not even once had I hurt anyone. Seeing the flat look she was receiving, she amended, I didn't hurt anyone who didn't deserve it while doing so. Now, just because some people are skittish, they expect me to give up my way of life to accommodate them? I don't think so. It was this that made Izuku realize that, though she didn't look it, Tatsumaki really was an older lady who was already quite firmly set in her ways. Nothing and no one was going to get her to change quickly or easily, not even the law. He silently hoped this rebellious streak didn't get her into trouble in the future. Yet his thoughts were derailed when he noticed something odd going on down below. Hey, look at that. Following his pointing finger, Tatsumaki saw what looked to be a car chase going on below. A black vehicle of some sort swerved in and out of traffic, narrowly dodging pedestrians as it transitioned from the street to the sidewalk at points to avoid police barricades, and pursuing cop cars. We need to stop them before somebody gets hurt. Tatsumaki looked at her nephew as if he'd grown a second head. Are you nuts? Your mother would never forgive me if I let anything happen to you. Izuku's eyes widened in alarm as he saw the car speeding towards the intersection. A little girl had stopped to pick up something she dropped. Turning to her with a fire in his eyes, he said, Tatsumaki. We don't have time to argue. People rarely look up, so we have the element of surprise, and if we don't do something now, that girl down there will die. SHT, she cursed, seeing exactly what he was talking about. She dive-bombed towards the ground. We're not gonna make it. Toss me towards her, I'll use the momentum to roll us both out of the way, then you stop the car. Are you stupid? You would need insane luck to pull that off and not die. He smirked at her, his eyes suddenly taking on an emerald hue. I'm the type of person who can make his own luck. Izuku, what dash? He cut her off, saying, no time, just do it. Seeing no other option, she tossed her only nephew into the path of a moving car and a frightened girl. Several things happened at once then. Izuku shot towards the frightened girl, wrapping his arms around her just as her death in the form of speeding polished black metal came roaring down on her. He activated his Empyrean eyes then. Never before had he attempted to affect the fate of something that was so large and already moving at such a breakneck pace. having only recently begun trying to use it against Kamikaze-sensei in their spars. Yet an innocent life was in danger, so he couldn't help but try he did. Wrapping his arms around the girl, he held her to his chest before he tucked and rolled. By some miracle, the two of them missed the oncoming death trap only for it to be covered seconds later in a green aura. The two rolled to a stop soon afterward with Izuku hitting his back roughly against a thick slab of cement, causing him to groan in pain. More than that, however, his eyes felt dry and hot like he'd accidentally gotten some kind of irritant in them. But that didn't matter to him at the moment. What mattered was the frightened girl in his arms. "Oi, you okay? Gigi Jero? Did she just croak?" He wondered to himself before pushing it aside upon noticing how she was trembling in his arms. He told her gently, "It's okay, you're safe now." She looked up at last from the safety of the arms of her savior. She had a pale complexion with a seemingly flat and rounded face, big dark eyes which were framed by long black hair that went down to her shoulders. "Are you okay?" he reiterated when she didn't answer. "Why yes." She managed to finally get out. "You sure? You're not hurt anywhere, are you?" She shook her head, making a note of the pain in his voice. "What about you, Jero? You sound like you're in pain." He smiled to reassure her, but it came out as more of a grimace. "I'm fine, don't worry about me. Are you able to get up okay?" Upon hearing this, the girl became conscious of the fact that she was still laying in the boy's arms. Blushing a bit, she swiftly got to her feet before offering a hand to her hero. He got up on shaky legs, his back bent. With a grunt he forced himself to stand erect, popping his jarred vertebra back in place as he did so. Looking at him in concern, the girl he saved asked, "Are you sure you're okay?" He nodded silently, his gaze now locked on the battle his aunt was partaking in. Through she stopped the car in midair, it didn't stop the robbers from escaping. One of them had a quirk that allowed him to turn himself and anything he was in contact with into shadows, thus allowing the group to escape their would-be prison. Another one of them was scruffy looking, wearing a cowboy hat, and had a rough roguish look to him with a tanned complexion and a face full of stubble. To his surprise, he converted his hand into a revolver-like weapon and pointed it at his aunt. He didn't think for that was unnecessary. Now was a time for action. Thinking quickly, he swept his gaze around looking for a suitable replacement for a bakugou. Finding one, he double-timed it over to a shopkeeper who was watching the fight, gaping-mouthed, broom in hand. Taking from him with a muttered apology, he snapped the brush head off before wading into the fray. Sprinting towards the gun hand-toting quirk user, he did a baseball slide into his legs, knocking him off balance just as he pulled the trigger on his makeshift weapon, sending the inhumanly sized bullet flying wide, slamming into a building, decimating it, sending debris flying and people screaming, running for cover. Rising from his slide, Izuku prepared to strike the man in the head, taking him out of the fight permanently, only to see said robber already pointing his quirked-out hand at him, scowling. Izuku didn't think, he just acted on impulse. Lashing out with his foot, he kicked the man's weaponized hand away once again, now pointing uselessly in the air. The moment he was out of danger, he lashed out with his makeshift sword, striking the man on the head. "Arg, you little SHT. That hurt." He pointed his other hand at the boy. It too was capable of converting itself into a revolver. The man gave him a grin that didn't reach his eyes as he said, "You played a good game, kid, but it looks like you drew a dead man's hand after all." Izuku stared down the barrel of the hand-turned gun. He watched as if in slow motion as the hammer that was the man's thumb was pulled back, his index finger had become a long barrel, was pointed at his head, while his middle finger that had become the trigger slowly began to decompress. In a panic, he did the only thing he could think of. He stuffed the end his weapon in the gun barrel, closing his eyes and praying for a miracle. A bang was heard, and a scream quickly followed it. Izuku opened his eyes to find the man in front of him rolling on the ground, gripping his hand which was bleeding profusely. Not too far away, he saw the man's thumb had been blown off somehow. If he wasn't in a state of shock, the sight might have sickened him. How did that did your quirk just backfire? He asked, not really believing what he was seeing. Glaring at the boy with hate-filled eyes, the robber retorted, what the F do you think, you little butt? Izuku felt kind of bad for the guy, yet at the same time, this same person would have had no qualms about hurting and even killing him and other innocent people. So, that stopped him from feeling too bad, plus with him incapacitated like this, he could focus on taking out the others, thus keeping people safe. Sweeping his gaze around the battlefield, he found his aunt had 2 of the 3 incapacitated, the only remaining was the Shadow Man. She couldn't seem to grab him with her powers. Not surprising considering he appeared to be a 2-dimensional being. Think, there has to be some way to trap him. So he watched their fight, looking for some sort of exploitable weakness. It took him a minute, but he finally noticed something. He seems to be sticking to the shadows. Does light hurt him? Tatsumaki. The light get him into the light, he called out to the heroine. The diminutive hero smirked viciously before she began uprooting any form of shade the crook could use for potential cover. But in the end, he was slippery as an eel and cunning as a snake. For he was able to slink into the shadows of a nearby alleyway and disappear, but not before calling out, in a deep sinister baritone, "This isn't over, hero." Izuku felt a chill run down his back at the villain's parting words, but in the end decided to pay them no mind. He had to make sure everyone else was alright. Yet as he turned around, he found himself face to face with an irate Tatsumaki. "And just what did you think you were doing rushing into the fight like that?" Keeping you from getting shot." He didn't understand why she was so angry. He managed to keep her safe like a hero should. Like she used to. Shouldn't she be proud of him? She scoffed upon hearing his answer, as if such a pathetic quirk could breach my psychokinetic barrier. "You, on the other hand, could have died if you hadn't lucked out. But I'm alright, so it's okay, right? Plus, isn't that what heroes are supposed to do, put themselves on the line for the good of other people?" The Esper worked her jaw silently before getting out, "That you're misinterpreting what it means to be a hero entirely. It's not about being a DMN martyr. It's about stopping the bad guys and doing the right thing because you have the power to do so. Something we failed to do today." She thought, glaring down the alleyway the final villain escaped down. But for heroes, doing the right thing means helping people even if it means getting hurt, even dying. Since that's the case, what's the difference between a hero and a martyr? Tatsumaki could feel a headache coming on from trying to dissuade her nephew from doing stupid things. So in the end, she sighed and decided, let Bang and the samurai deal with this, they have far more patience than I do for this sort of thing. Grabbing his hand and encapsulating them both in her green aura, she said, "Come on, we're done here." Noticing the girl he'd helped earlier motioning him over, he shook his aunt off, saying, "Hold on a second." Seeing the girl motion him closer to what could only be her mother by her side, Tatsumaki could only grin and say, "Alright, but don't take too long." "Okay, Romeo." Izuku gave her an odd look, wondering who Romeo was before making his way over. "Yo." The younger of the two proceeded to throw her arms around his neck. "That was reckless, Jero." She bopped him on the head. "You shouldn't interfere in hero fights like that. You could have gotten hurt." He shrugged. He refused to feel sorry for keeping his aunt and others safe. It's what a hero would do after all. "True, but I couldn't just let them gang up on my aunt like that and do nothing. I couldn't call myself a hero or a man if I did." "Your aunt?" she said, pointing at the waiting diminutive psychokinetic. Seeing him nod, she understood his actions somewhat. "Still, he's reckless. But very courageous and helpful though." Izuku suddenly felt a hand rubbing his head. Glancing up, he noted an older woman with a striking resemblance to a frog was rubbing his head. "Thank you so much for saving my little tadpole, young man. While it was reckless of you to change out into the street like that, I don't even want to think about what would happen if you hadn't." Said little tadpole, blushed profusely, "Mom. Please don't call me that in public, Jero." Said woman let out of ruck, in the form of croaking laughter before she said, now Tsuyu-chan, have you even introduced yourself to you, little hero? Jero, she croaked upon realizing that no, she had not. Bowing at the waist, she said, thank you for saving me, my name is Azuri Tsuyu, but please, call me Tsu. Now of all times, his stutter acted up, Midoriya Izuku, happy to meet you Azuri-san. She glowered slightly at this, call me Tsu, I want my friends to call me Tsu. Realizing what she said, she blushed and suddenly found the cement around her very interesting. The silence that followed was tense and soul-crushing for the frog-formed quirk carrier. She could just imagine the look of revulsion on his face, like that of all her classmates at Salty Banks Elementary. Instead, she received a surprise, you want to be my friend? Really? Looking up, she found her hero looking at her in shock, as if no one has ever asked to be his friend before. Tsuyu realized. He's like me. Giving the biggest smile she could, she replied, yes. That'd be great, he replied, managing only to stutter a little. Before she could ask him where he lived or anything like that, his aunt called out to him, Izuku, give her your number, get your embrace, and let's go. Embrace, both children thought at the same time, a blush staining their faces. Tsuyu recovered first, thinking about it logically, well he did save me, and that's what the princesses always gave the knights, right? Izuku, however, was having a miniature panic attack, embrace. Why would Tatsuo-san say that? I mean I know I saved her, but I would never expect her to dash. His brain suddenly shut down when Tsu's tongue flew out of her mouth and pressed itself to his cheek. It took him all of half a second to figure out what she was doing, and another second for his face to turn bright red. IMTH thank you, he squeaked out. GG Jero. A croak was all Tsuyu managed to get out. Click, click, the two were drawn out of their embarrassed dazes by the sound of two cameras going off. Looking around they found Tsuyu's mother and Tatsumaki both doing their best to hide their cell phones. Mom! Auntie, they both yelled out at the same time. Izuku rushed towards his aunt trying to grab the phone away from her, to no avail, while Tsuyu attempted to do the same to her own mother with similar results. While this was going on, Tatsumaki was approached by an individual giving off a stern aura with a wooden mask covering his face, shoes, and his arms. The rest of him was covered in a form-fitting black body suit. Excuse me ma'am, but do you have a hero's license? Tatsumaki floated her phone a good 10 feet off the ground to keep Izuku from getting at it as she answered, what do you want kid? Can't you see I'm busy? Narrowing his eyes behind his mask, Kamui Woods asked again, do you have a hero license? To which he received a snort and curt reply, no, but I've been with the Hero Association since its founding. Tatsumaki, the Tornado of Terror, perhaps you've heard of me? A sea of mutters started up through the crowd, which by now included various news reporters. One, a young lady aspiring for an anchorwoman position, asked, Tatsumaki-san, are you coming out of retirement? Should this stunning display of heroism mark your return with your sidekick by your side? Looking past the greenhorn hero, she replied curtly, I'm not sure, but Izuku isn't my sidekick. What is he to you then? Another asked. He's my nephew, she said, beaming with pride. It was his idea to get involved, he saved a pedestrian and everything. I'm very proud of him. Silence reigned for all of 5 seconds before Izuku found himself swarmed by reporters. What's it like being the son of Fubuki, the Tornado of Hell? Do you feel like you have big shoes to fill? Who is your father? Is it the caped baldy who disappeared 20 years ago? Is it Blast? No, look at the color of his hair, it would have to be Genos the cyber demon, right? That's enough. Suddenly they were all pushed back by a wave of psychokinetic power. Tatsumaki swiftly reminded them all why her moniker was the Tornado of Terror. The glare was a mere display of authority, silenced the story-hungry reporters. She then turned to her nephew and asked, Izuku, do you want to answer any questions? It's up to you. We can leave right now if you want. Well, maybe just one would be okay. Before the shouting match for his attention could even begin, Tatsumaki silenced them all with a glare. Turning back to him she said, "Pick someone." He pointed at a young lady. The same young woman who first questioned his aunt. "You, miss? Kiyomi Takada, NHN. I guess, since I only have one question, I have to ask. How do you feel right now having participated in your first rescue?" Giving his best smile, he replied, "I'm happy no one was hurt, and everybody is safe. I hope to be able to help more people in the future after I become a hero." Kiyomi couldn't help but be infected by his optimism, "And I'm sure you'll be a great hero when you get older just like your mother and aunt." "I sure hope so," he replied nervously. "Okay, interview's over. Izuku, time to go." Tatsumaki took his hand before covering them both in her green aura. Without another word, the two blasted off into the sky. "I've got a scoop. Son of the Blizzard of Hell breaks up robbery with aunt. I can see the front page already," Kiyomi thought. The thoughts of one Tsuyu Azui were about the same boy but much more earnest and simpler. "I made a friend today." They arrived at the dojo in short order. It was old and a bit run down on the exterior, missing a few shingles on the roof and requiring a fresh coat of paint, but other than looking a bit run down, it was perfectly serviceable. Tatsumaki was not impressed with the place, however. Giving a huff and mumbling something about laziness and bad first impressions, she blasted the doors down with a blast of psychokinetic might before stepping casually over the doors. Bang and Kamikaze, who were in the middle of drinking tea, one with his cup half raised and the other with it tilted towards his now open and flabbergasted mouth, causing it to spill on his kimono. Atomic Samurai was the first to react, though that was mainly due to the hot tea he'd spilled on his crotch. Jumping into the air, he patted himself down yelling, "Hot, hot, hot. Tatsumaki-chan, it's been quite some time. How have you been?" Bang inquired, smiling warmly at her. Shaking his head at her casual destruction of personal property, he said, "I am so sorry about the door, Bang-sensei." "Ah, Midoriya-chan, you're here too." Bang turned his attention back to Tatsumaki. "What brings you by, and how do you know our student?" "He's my nephew, and I came by because I'm curious about his training regime." Atomic Samurai, who had by now calmed down, whistled. "Nephew, then that means his mom is Fubuki, yes. TCH, DMN, I lost." Atomic Samurai reached into his kimono and placed a handful of yen into Bang's waiting palm. "What was all that about?" Izuku asked. Shrugging, Bang replied, "We had a small bet going on whether or not you were a kid from someone the older generation. I was right, but I never would have expected Fubuki-chan. Then again, she did suddenly disappear several years ago, but you wished to speak about Izuku's training, yes, Tatsumaki-chan?" Bang inquired, snapping himself out of his wistful fugue. Sitting cross-legged on the tatami mats across from her former colleague, she nodded. "Yeah, he told me he has an almost unnatural talent with the sword, but when it comes to weaponless martial arts, not so much." "Is that about right?" Kamikaze smirked. "That's not the half of it. The kid fights like he was born with a sword in his hand. For him, fighting with a weapon is no different than breathing. I've never had someone learn this quickly. Not Okametachi, Bushidrill, or even Iain learned the art of the sword this fast." The Esper nodded as if she expected this. Turning to the martial arts MSTR, she stated more than asked, "When it comes to learning your waterfall smashing rock fist, he just can't grasp it, right?" Izuku hung his head in shame. For though she was blunt, she was also right on the money. Despite all of his considerable effort, he could not grasp anything beyond the fundamentals of the water stream rock smashing fist. He jumped slightly when he felt someone's hand on his head. Looking up, he noticed it was Bang, who said, "No need to be discouraged, Izuku-kun, I'm sure you'll get it. In fact, unless I'm wrong, Tatsumaki-chan has a theory." Looking to his aunt with eyes full of hope, he asked, "Tatsuobi-san?" Slowly nodding as if confirming something, Tatsumaki pulled both of Atomic Samurai's blades from where they sat at his waist and presenting them to her nephew asked, "Izuku, what can you tell me about these swords?" "What can I tell you about them?" he echoed. Seeing her nod, he began to elaborate. The shorter of the two swords is Hocho Toshiro. It was an heirloom of the Ashikaga shogunate, forged almost 700 years ago in the year 1569. It has a 2-shaku and 7-sun long blade that had been folded over several times during the forging process, giving it a ripple pattern on the edge. It has a guard in the shape of an atomic symbol made of solid iron, which was a recent addition. The grip wrapped in genuine rayskin and silk cord. 2 brass pegs hold the blade securely to the handle, with an iron cap on the end. He set it aside and picked up the longer of the two. This is Tsuruga Masamune. It has a 3-shaku and 6-sun long blade. Like Hocho Toshiro, the blade has been folded over several times during the forging process, giving it a ripple pattern on the edge, also the same as the guard shape, and work of the handle being of rayskin, silk, being held together by brass pegs. He paused then before finishing. The key difference is, that between the two, Tsuruga Masamune is the work of Sagami Province's legendary swordsmith Masamune. Forged in 1303, making it almost 900 years old. Also, this sword became the favored weapon of Otani Yoshitsugu, lord of Tsuruga Castle. He looked up after feeling an awkward tension in the air. When he did, he saw everyone staring at him, various states of shock. Kamikaze looked the most surprised, his eyes open wide with his mouth slack, while Bang's eyes were merely open wider than usual. Tatsumaki just looked surprised, mostly smug due to the knowing smile she had on her face, but still, even she looked impressed at the sheer amount of information he was able to provide. He found himself asking, "Did I do something wrong?" This got a laugh from the small older woman. "Wrong? Hell no, but I think I pegged your problem. Or more accurately, why you're so skilled with weapons." Leaning forward eagerly, Izuku said, "Yeah. What is it, Tatsu?" "I can now say with almost certainty that you have an Esper ability. That of psychometry. Or the ability to tell the history of an object through psychic means, usually touch." Izuku mulled over this information and finally asked, "So is it impossible for me to learn Water Stream Rock Smashing Fist?" Casting her gaze around the dojo, Tatsumaki found her sight settling on a pair of steel training swords that were usually used for practicing techniques and not contact sparring. Levitating them over to her nephew, she said, "Take these and get ready to spar with Bang. I have an idea." Izuku couldn't help but question, Tatsuobi-san, is this safe?" The green-haired Esper waved off his concerns. "It'll be okay, Bang may not look it, but he's actually quite durable." "Oi!" Ignoring the former third-ranked S-class hero's shout of indignation and seeing neither of them moving, she huffed and bit out, "Well, get moving." Thus did Bang and Izuku end up standing across from one another on the sparring room floor. One nervously holding 2 shin-ace, the other taking a loose combat stance. Looking over to his aunt, Izuku couldn't help but inquire, "Why exactly are we doing this, Tatsu? You never said." Tatsumaki smacked her fist into her waiting palm. "Oh, that's right, I haven't explained yet, have I? Well, it's simple in theory. If you can read and utilize the history of an object, allowing you to learn sword techniques faster and in some cases instantaneously, then, in theory, you should after a PRD of time be able to learn and adapt to any attack you're confronted with. You'd just be absorbing the most recent history of the weapons after all." Izuku gave it a moment of thought. "Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Provided it actually works like you think it will. Well, we'll only know if we try, so get to it. Also, Bang, don't hold back. Izuku won't learn anything if you do." "Understood." Tension filled the air as the two faced off. Izuku swallowed nervously. Then without warning, the martial arts MSTR struck. Bang was on him in an instant, his feet covering ground even as they flowed forward much like an ice skater. He struck out with his open palm, and by sheer luck, he managed to block it with his left blade. Miraculously he managed to repeat this feat if only just when Bang swatted aside his meager defense and attacked him with his other arm. When both of his sensei's fists came barreling straight for his chst, Izuku hastily formed a protective X over his torso with his weapons. Tempered steel shattered like glass moments before the younger of the two combatants was sent flying across the room only to land in a heap. Rushing over to help him up, Bang asked, "Are you alright, Midoriya-kun?" He was alright, but it wasn't him who answered. Instead, a familiar voice replied, "You shoulda used reinforcement, lad. You'd have lasted longer then." Everyone's gaze locked onto Zelretch, who was, conveniently enough, sitting next to Tatsumaki on the sidelines. Blinking in surprise, Izuku asked, "Zelretch-san, when did you dash?" He was cut off by Tatsumaki, who levitated herself inches from the wizard marshal's face and began shooting off questions rapid fire. "Who the heck are you? How did you get in here? Who said you could sit so close to me? How do you know my nephew, and what were you talking about just now?" Striking a pose, he replied grandiosely, "I am, Zelretch kissed your swineorg, wizard marshal." "Never heard of you," Tatsumaki replied flatly, "and you still didn't answer the rest of my questions." "Ah yes, to answer the rest of your questions, my dear, I didn't use the door, I can sit wherever the hell I dmn well please, I am the one who gave your nephew his abilities, and I was just talking about one of them." Turning to Izuku as the Esper silently processed all of that, he asked, "Well, why didn't you use reinforcement, lad?" "I have no idea what that is, Zelretch-san." Blinking owlishly, the vampiric magician asked, I thought I gave you the book before I left." "Book?" Seeing the boy's confused look, he elaborated, "Yeah, it was a tome that explained the ins and outs of School of Material Transmutation, or Magecraft 101 if you prefer." The green-haired boy shook his head. "No, you never gave me anything like that. In fact, you never even explained what you did to me. Or what those weird lines in my left arm are." Running a hand down his face, Zelretch asked, "SHT. I didn't even activate and explain to you about your magic circuits. I really dropped the ball this time. Why the rush? I was late for a very important date. I almost missed tea time with the Mad Hatter, March Hare, and Dormouse. That DMN Dormouse always curses me out if I'm late." He wanted to protest. He wanted to ask for answers, but in the end, Izuku shook his head at the incredulity of it all. After all, anything is possible for someone who can travel multiple dimensions, right? Sighing, he said, "Well, what's done is done. Can you tell me about these magic circuits now before you leave again?" Heaving himself to his feet and leaning heavily on his cane, he made his way over, saying, "Sure kid, I was under the impression you had 3 months of practice under your belt by now anyway." Getting a firm grip on his left arm, Izuku felt a sudden slightly uncomfortable warmth envelope his limb, along with a tingling like pins and needles. But he could feel it now. The magic circuits, as Zelretch called them, were open and active. He already knew he possessed 32 of them, but now he was also aware of how much magical energy each one contained. Each individual circuit held 16 units of energy for a grand total 512 units. There, that's one mistake fixed. "Tell me, lad, how much prana do you have?" "Prana?" he echoed. The wizard marshal rubbed his head, thinking, this kid has a lot to learn. He elaborated, "Magical energy in the circuits. Oh, 512. That's better than the boys when he first activated his. He'll get them up to Archer's level with time, I'm sure." Clapping his hands together, he said, "Excellent. That's really above par. Now if you want to use them in the future, you'll need to think of some kind of mental trigger." Mental trigger? The very idea brought up the image of that one quirk user's dead man's hand quirk. Picking the image of a gun hammer being cocked for the sake of simplicity, he nodded to the dead apostle ancestor. Zelretch promptly continued, "Now, for the interests of time, I'm going to give you a quick crash course on the basics and give you the book before I leave this time. Remind me, okay?" Izuku nodded, and the two got to work. It took all of an hour for someone as smart as Izuku was to pick up what Zelretch was telling him. Material transmutation, if going by the name alone, one would think this branch of magic was somehow related to alchemy. However, Zelretch quickly corrected him on 2 points. The first was the difference between what he called magecraft and true magic. That difference being that magecraft reproduces what science and technology already can do in a given era, while true magic goes beyond what science and technology are capable of at the time. Zelretch then proclaimed himself a wielder of the second of the 5 true magics. That of kaleidoscope, which allowed him to go into other dimensions. He then explained that alchemy was its own branch of magecraft that converted matter or phenomena other forms, while material transmutation merely enhanced what was already present. Soaking all of this information in, Izuku asked one niggling question: if magecraft is reproducing what science and technology can already do, then doesn't Rixan's portal gun render you magic mere magecraft? To his surprise, the vampire nodded sagely. Yes, if the Rick from my home dimension had bothered to develop his portal gun at all, it would indeed render my magic a mere craft. But because the Rick from my dimension chose to raise a family over science, my magic is still just as potent. Now then, ready to get started? Receiving a nod, Zelretch taught him the basics of material transmutation using the broken swords as a teaching tool. Using reinforcement, he correctly aligned the shards of both blades and then fused them back together following the mental blueprint. After that, Izuku enhanced them as much as he could before taking them in hand once more. Turning to Bang, at last, the wannabe hero said, "Let's try this again, sensei." Bang, who had been sitting cross-legged on the floor patiently waiting for just such an announcement, took to his feet and took a relaxed stance. Zelretch stood off the side, watching with keen interest. Bang launched forward without warning, aiming a palm strike at his apprentice's sternum. He deflected it with a flick of his blades. A swing was aimed at his chin from the left. Izuku sidestepped, batting the strike wide before attempting to retaliate with a poke to his MSTR's ribs. But Bang merely danced out of reach. Giving his student a nod of approval, the martial artist dashed back into the fray. A curving right hook was dodged and pushed wide, and the return blade swing was knocked low. The bone-crunching straight punch met a barrier of steel that would not give protecting its owner even as he was lifted off his feet and sent backward. Pressing his advantage, Bang unleashed a flurry of attacks, yet to his surprise, Izuku managed to defend against almost all of them. Only the last 2 of the nearly 24 strikes making it past his defense as his blades broke once again. The living treasure of martial arts expected his student to call for a break so he could fix his weapons once again or perhaps call it a day. Yet, instead, he half-clenched his hands around handles that did not exist while closing his eyes in concentration. Okay, Zelretch told me that projection works by imagining what I wanted to create as vividly as I could in my mind. I know what the blade was made of and how it was made thanks to structural grasping. So this should be a piece of cake, I hope. Gradation air. The air picked up, and an aura of power flowed around Izuku before lightning flashed from his palms before coalescing into the form of his broken blades which lay discarded at his feet. With determination burning in his eyes, he let his MSTR know this fight was far from finished simply from his stance. His breathing evened out, his legs bent slightly prepared to both run and dodge, and his blades though held at his sides were bent at an angle, proving that Izuku was ready to both attack and defend at a moment's notice. Bang noted all of this and could only gape at the fact that his apprentice had effectively gone from a white belt to an orange belt in just a few hours of direct sparring. It seems Tatsumaki was correct in her assumptions. For a moment, the hero known as Silver Fang was impressed by the sheer display of power he showed. Yet that moment of quiet pride in his student cost him. For the first time in their spar, it was Izuku who took the offensive. Getting a running start, the boy leaped toward his teacher using his added momentum to bring down both blades in an overhead strike. Bang crossed both of his arms up over his face and much to his surprise, the steel blades shattered like so much glass before fading away into motes of light. Izuku was undeterred, however, and used this moment of surprise to deliver a punishing strike to his MSTR's gut. Bang was thrown off balance, and his apprentice refused to let up. Another pair of blades appeared in a flash of light, and he stuck, this time armed. He slammed one blade into the older man's leg and the other into his arm, sending him sprawling but breaking both of his weapons in the process. Refusing to let Bang regain his wits, Izuku charged in, projecting yet another pair of training swords, one of which he held at his side with his arm across his chest, and the other was raised above his head at a left angle. But he was too slow, and Bang was on his feet by the time Izuku got to him. Faster than he expected, Bang threw out another straight punch. Izuku spun, hoping to bleed off some of the power while blocking with one of his weapons, yet it shattered anyway on contact. Placing both hands on his remaining weapon, and using the strength of both arms and momentum from his spin, he slammed the blade home in the retired hero's stomach. Bang was lifted him off his feet from the impact, but the blade too shattered as Izuku attempted to fling his teacher away. The end result was Bang being flung half-heartedly through the air and landing in a heap much like Izuku did in their very first bout. Rushing to his side, green eyes filled with concern, Izuku asked, "Sensei, are you all right?" Sitting up, Silver Fong replied, "I'm fine." "You did well today, Izuku-kun. I'm proud of you." The boy in question smiled before looking at the floor, embarrassed by the praise. A bright red blush lit up his face when the sound of clapping on the sidelines reached his ears. When a slender hand rested itself on his shoulder, he looked up to see his aunt giving him a 1,000-watt smirk. "That's my nephew. Beating a former S-class and not even in the double digits regarding age yet." Thanks, Tatsuo-san, but it was just a spar. You know, practice." Izuku didn't quite know how to accept her praise. To be honest, he was still fretting that he might have hurt his teacher. He was over 100 after all. PFF, so you still won. Which is in and of itself impressive. The Esper commented offhandedly. To which Bang nodded and added, "She's right, Izuku. You did well beating me, even if only because you caught me off guard. It won't be so easy next time. I promise you." "Someone sounds bitter he lost," Kamikaze commented, before patting the boy on the shoulder and saying, "You did good, kid." "I'm not bitter, I simply don't want Izuku getting a big head thinking he can beat me so easily," Bang grumbled. Zelretch made his way over, his whole arm submerged into his BRST pocket as he did so. "Good show, lad. Here, this should be of use over the coming months." Seeing everyone staring, he said, "What? Never seen a pocket dimension before? Anyway, here you go, lad." Pulling his arm out of his pocket, he emerged holding a thick LTHR-bound journal that was kept shut with a silver clasp in the form of a sword being placed in a sheath. Taking it, he noted a large red gem in the shape of a kite shield was embossed into the center of the cover. Looking up at the old man of the jewels, he silently nodded his thanks, receiving a pat on the shoulder in response. "Well, I guess I should be going." Noting his slightly bitter tone, Izuku couldn't help but ask the dead apostle, "Is something wrong, Zelretch-san?" Sighing, the vampire replied, "Well, I thought you had 3 months' worth of magic practice, and along with the notes, you would have had some skill with reinforcement, alteration, and projection at this point. But that isn't the case." Frowning slightly, Izuku asked, "Did you need my help with something?" To which, "Yes actually, but as you are right now, it would be too dangerous. Now I'll have to ask someone else to assist me, Aoko maybe." He muttered the last bit to himself, but Izuku still heard it all the same. Gaining a determined look, he asked, "What can I do to help?" The magician blinked, taking in the serious look he was sporting. He said, "You want to help?" A nod. "And nothing I say can make you change your mind, right?" Another nod. Sighing and rubbing the bridge of his nose, Zelretch muttered to himself, "I'm starting to think you're too much like him." Clapping his hands together, he came to a decision, "Fine, you can help." He cut the grin the boy was starting to sport short by saying, "To a point, and not to the same capacity I was initially planning." The lettuce-haired boy didn't care, he was just happy to help. Okay, when do we leave? ASAP. The vampire replied, before reaching into his coat and pulling out a short sword made entirely out of rainbow-colored crystal. He slashed the air with it, creating a multicolored portal into the ether. Before we go, can I make a couple of phone calls? Izuku asked. Seeing the wizard nod, Izuku turned to Bang and asked, can I use your phone? It's in the back. He replied, jabbing a thumb in the general direction he needed to go. Now hang on just a minute here. All eyes turned to Tatsumaki, who was fuming by now. Pointing her finger at her nephew, she said, you are not going anywhere, your mother, my sister would never forgive me if I just let you go. She pointed at Zelretch, you aren't taking him anywhere. Not when it's my job to look after him. She then glared at Bang and Kamikaze, and you two must have taken leave of your senses if you think it's okay for a 6-year-old to go who knows where with some random old man. Tatsumaki, said Esper blinked. Not only at the fact that for the first time since he realized they were related did Izuku call her by her full name, but the intensity by which he said it. Holding her gaze firmly on his own, he spoke earnestly, Zelretch-san needs my help. I can't turn him down. He was the one who gave me my powers. The chance to follow my dream of becoming a hero. I can't not help him when he needs me. He said it was dangerous. Tatsumaki pointed out. That's fine if I can help people. He retorted. Not this again. Raising her head to the heavens, Tatsumaki let out a pained groan, before locking eyes with him. Fine. Do what you want. But I'm coming with you. 'Cause if you died doing something stupid, Fubuki will never forgive me. Glaring at the wizard marshal as if daring him to contradict her, she asked, is that going to be a problem? Not at all. The more, the merrier, and all that. Giving a brisk nod, she said, good. Izuku, go make your phone calls. We'll leave when you get back. The last thing Izuku expected when he stepped through the portal, book on material transmutation in hand, was to wind up in the middle of a church. High vaulted ceilings of stone with beams of light as if signs from God coming down from the heavens. As he looked up, his eyes took in a fantastic sight. Above him was a massive dome, covered in depictions of holy men and angels, with the pictures slowly shrinking towards the image of a crescent moon. It was an appealing sight, one Izuku was sure he would never forget. His attention was drawn to the vampire, who commented offhandedly, quite something, isn't it? The dome, I mean. Taking a moment to find his voice, Izuku replied, why yeah, where are we? He asked at length. Spreading his arms wide, Zelretch replied, welcome to St. Peter's Bastille in Vatican City, in my home universe. Izuku took a moment to process that. Not only had he moved halfway around the world, but he was also in another universe. It made his head swim a bit thinking about it, but he shook away his fugue. Zelretch and Riksan do this all the time, so I doubt going from one end of the world to another is anything special. In fact, I bet some quirks can do the same thing. Now calmed, he turned his gaze back to the wizard marshal, who was in the midst of an argument with his aunt. I highly doubt you brought us here to show us a fancy ceiling, get on with it. Of course, of course. This way. He proceeded to lead the group down one of the 4 branching hallways that sat under the dome like roots beneath a tree. Izuku noted as they walked that the priests here not only gave their group a wide berth, but whispered as they passed, and some even made the symbol of the cross upon their chests upon seeing their approach. He noted most were directing dirty looks at the vampire's way, and he couldn't help but wonder why. Zelretch-san, did you do something wrong to get all of these people to hate you so much? No lad, it's the fact that I am both the things the church can't stand at the same time that causes them to hate me. I am both a vampire, one of the 26 dead apostle ancestors no less, and at the same time a true magician, proving that the miracles of Jesus, including his resurrection, were not the only miracles in the world. Oh, a magician and a vampire, that makes sense. He paused a moment before asking, where are we going? Halt, abomination! Peering around the vampire's coat, he saw no less than 3 priests with blades in their hands, held in between their fingers and thumbs. Black keys, his eyes told him, holy items of the church. Used by their executors, and meant to bind, consecrate, and purify that which they considered unholy in the eyes of God. Vampires and mages were chief among that considered heretical. Behind them was an ornate door. Sighing, Zelretch said, "Gentlemen, can we not do this every time I show up to talk to Frank?" The first priest, an elderly man with a thin serpentine build, blue eyes, and shock white hair spoke briskly, "You shall not refer to His Holiness Pope Francis as Frank. Abomination. It is only due to His Holiness' infinite mercy even for a monster such as you that I do not cut you down for your insolence here and now." The priest's stern gaze rested on him. Izuku felt himself flinch involuntarily, but he refused to look away. The priest scanned his gaze across those assembled before him. He scoffed saying, "I see you've gathered more heretics about you, abomination." Zelretch was suddenly nose to nose with the judgmental priest, a sardonic grin on his face as he said, "You know sonny, and I've put up with you for so long because I find the fact that you even think you can hurt me amusing. Continue to insult my guests, however, and I will no longer be amused, and you will find just what it means to truly fight the magician who killed Crimson Moon Brunestad. Am I clear?" Tension hung thick in the corridor, and Izuku thought it was going to come to blows. Thankfully, that was averted by the sound of the door opening and an elderly man poking his head out and saying, "Father Fawn, I thought I heard." His eyes brightened upon seeing Zelretch, and he said, "Ah, so I did, so I did. Welcome, Zelretch, welcome. Come in, come in. Would you or any of your associates like some tea?" To which the apostle politely shook his head and replied, "No can do Frank, I just thought I'd drop in and say hello, and introduce you to my latest protege, Midoriya Izuku." Bowing nervously, said boy stuttered out, Hello sir. That's your holiness you heretic. Show proper dash," but Father Fawn was silenced by a simple hand gesture from the Pope. "There is no cause to treat guests with anything less than utmost courtesy, Father Fan. For did the Son, knowing he would be betrayed by Judas Iscariot, banish him from the Last Supper?" Hanging his head, the fanatic replied, "He did not." "He did not," the Pope echoed, his voice filled with soft rebuke, "and so too shall we not. Now, leave us please." The priest scowled but did as bidden by his superior. Not before shooting the wizard marshal and his new apprentice a glare and mouthing, "Next time," towards them did he stalk off, his fellows in tow. After they'd left, Pope Francis turned the group assembled before his chambers and said, "I apologize for their behavior. Now, what can I do for you? We need to visit the Eighth Sacrament. Considering last time I showed up there, Narabek attacked me. Ah, yes, the paperwork storm of 2016, we can't have that happening again now, can we? So I suppose by coming to me, you wish to use the front door." Seeing the dead apostle nod, he motioned the group into his office. It was Spartan, yet the few items therein were of the highest quality. A highly polished oak wood desk dominated the room with bookshelves lining the walls. Off to one side was a set-off glass doors leading out onto a balcony. Behind said workstation was a painting consisting of an angel appearing before a woman in red and blue, a marble table between them on which a chalice sat. Using structural analysis on the artwork, Izuku identified it as the Annunciation by Leonardo da Vinci. "Does the painting intrigue you, my son?" The Pope asked, taking a seat behind his desk which was covered in piles of paperwork. A small space was cleared out for a silver laptop which sat open on his desk. "It's interesting, but what I'm wondering about more is the game you're playing on your laptop." "That's Undertale, isn't it?" Izuku asked, recognizing the music coming from the machine. Looking a tad embarrassed, the Pope replied, "That it is, I was gifted it by a rather eccentric young man some time ago. I play it in my free time. I find it has a rather potent message." Cocking his head to the side, Izuku asked, "What message?" "That no matter if we be man or monster, the Lord created us all in his own image and accepts us as we are. So too should those of the faith endeavor to do the same. The Pope paused before asking, perhaps you could indulge an old man, but you come from another universe, don't you? Yes, sir. Nodding, the Pope asked, how exactly did you become Zelretch's apprentice? Izuku opened his mouth, closed it, before opening it again and saying, I helped him and some friends of his. In return, he gave me magic circuits. The Pope Francis gave the vampire an astonished look. Zelretch, you turned the boy into a mage. For what reason? I asked him to, Izuku replied, sensing an argument about to start, flabbergasting the pontiff. Turning to the boy, the Bishop of Rome asked, why would you ask him to do such a thing? Why the pain you must have endured? Taking a deep breath and letting it out, Izuku explained, in my universe, 80% of the population is born with some kind of superpower, called quirks. I was one of the few who wasn't. More than anything, all I ever wanted was to be a hero, a legal profession back home. But with no quirk, it was impossible for me. Everyone told me so. Even my own mother. But despite that, I persevered. But when the chance came to actually have superpowers, I jumped at it, because it meant I could chase my dream for real. To be a hero. To protect everyone with a smile, yes. Giving a sigh of nostalgia, the Pope recalled another young man who spoke precisely like this boy. Shooting his head up from where he was gazing at the boy, he said, Zelretch, did you? Seeing the sht-eating grin spreading across the vampire's face, Pope Francis sighed and said, you've deliberately opened a can of worms, haven't you? Utterly clueless as to what was going on, Izuku asked, what are you talking about? Placing a hand on his shoulder, Pope Francis said, my son, you are in for quite the trial and tribulation. Would you accept a blessing from this old man for your safety? Like more than half of the people in Japan, even 200 years into the future from where he currently was, Izuku was a believer in Shinto. However, he considered it rude to say no to a man who was the head of one of the world's largest religious organizations, and ruler of this city to boot. So he nodded, and the Pope motioned for him to take a knee, his head bowed. Doing so, the Bishop of Rome recited, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, offer protection to this soul in his future trials and let him come out of the den of lions unscathed. May the light of the Holy Trinity guide him in darkness and deliver him from all the evils of this world. Amen. Alleluia. Amen. The moment the Pope finished his prayer, the clouds parted just so, allowing a of light to beam down from the heavens and shine down directly on the young boy before him. The pontiff's eyes widened in surprise, but it didn't end there. The sound of flapping wings was heard next, and both a crow and dove. They stood there on his balcony for a moment before flying off. A minute later the dove returned, an olive branch in its beak. Then to top it all off, a double rainbow appeared in the sky. The Pope was slack-jawed. Never in all of his years had he seen so many signs of the Lord. What could it mean? What does the Lord intend for this boy? Sir, are we done now? Izuku, who was utterly oblivious to all of this from his kneeling position on the floor having never received a Western blessing before, asked. Taking a moment to collect himself, the Pope replied, yes, my son. You may rise. Doing so, Izuku missed the silent conversation going on between the Pope and the dead apostle ancestor. Neither knew what that was, but both were fully aware it was significant, they just weren't sure how. Nodding to each other, they silently decided to find out, each using their own resources at their disposal. Clearing his throat before going to the painting, Pope Francis said, let's continue on, shall we? He then proceeded to slide his hand down the side of the frame until he heard a slight click. Pulling on the frame revealed a secret passageway hidden behind it. Picking up a nearby lit candelabra just inside the entrance, Francis motioned towards the opening. He said, please, follow me, everyone. As they walked down into the depths led by the most influential man in Vatican City, Tatsumaki decided to interrogate a particular vampire on what just happened up above. Forcing her way into his mind via telepathy, she said promptly, would you mind explaining just what the hell happened up there? Just what do you mean? You know DMN well what I mean. What was with the light, the birds, and the rainbow? The wizard marshal paused before replying, I don't know. You don't know, the psychokinetic fumed. No, but I intend to find out. I promise. I'll hold you to that. Tatsumaki assured him before severing the connection as the group finally came to a stop in front of a large door. Embossed in pure silver on the front was a man hanging from a tree. A bag of silver coins lay spilled at his feet. Beneath the picture was the phrase, non potest malum et passus hic. What does that say? Izuku asked. It is Latin, the language of the church. It means, no evil shall be suffered here. The image is that of Judas Iscariot, the apostle who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of Roman silver. He hung himself after the crucifixion. Ah, I see. The young boy nodded, pretending he understood a thing the pontiff just said, which he did not. Regardless, the Pope stepped forward and spoke, let they who deny the Lord on earth, be denounced in heaven. A slow creaking was heard, and the doors slowly swung inward, revealing the interior of the burial agency. It consisted of thickly carved stone, with braziers lining the walls, the flickering flames casting looming shadows all over and sending an unwanted shiver down Izuku's spine. Tapestries hung from stone pillars like banners of forgotten heroes, and a chill hung in the air despite the heat being given off by the illuminating flames all around them. Then, from the darkness before them, the patter of soled feet on stone could be heard. Out of the gloom came an elderly priest. He had a warm and welcoming smile on his face and gave off a grandfatherly air that was only further enhanced by the kindly smile and pince-nez he wore. He had a black cassock with covering most of his body, with brown dress pants and black shoes covering his lower half. He had a red and black diamond-patterned shawl draped over his shoulders and a gold-chained necklace holding a giant ruby in its center. On the back of his head was a tiny red hat. Bowing respectfully to the Pope, the priest said, I can take them from here if it pleases you, Your Holiness. The Bishop of Rome nodded, yes, thank you Miriam. Turning to the group, he continued, I leave you in capable hands. Good luck on your endeavors. Taking a sconce from one of the braziers, the priest known as Miriam said to them, please, follow me. The MSTR has been expecting you ever since you arrived. How is my old friend King of Rats? Izuku looked at his aunt, hoping she would have some inkling as to what they were talking about, but she shrugged, just as clueless as he was. So all they could do was stay silent and listen. Sighing a little, the priest replied in a melancholy tone, he's doing well enough, all things considered. Running a hand through his hair, the wizard marshal commented, it's been 6 months. He didn't even mourn this long after I offed Crimson Moon. To which the priest chuckled coldly and replied, oh, he's not mourning, he's to the point of killing everyone even remotely responsible. Zelretch paused mid-step before continuing on and saying, well at least he's past denial and isolation. That's the thing, he's already tried bargaining, and he was depressed for weeks after that fell through. The tone, the King of Rats, used to put the wielder of the second magic on edge. Hesitantly, he asked, bargaining, with who? The priest paused before leading them around a corner before saying, first he tried the White Princess, but her guardian wouldn't let him get close. DMN kid, he's annoying even with a BLNDFLD on, the old man of the jewels muttered, and then what did he do? When the demon failed to answer, the vampire from the Age of Gods reiterated himself. Sighing he finally answered, he went to the keeper of BLD pacts. Altrouge? He despises her. Hell, even I'm not a fan. What's she longing in return for this miracle? The head of the White Princess. The King of Rats paused, giving the wizard marshal a moment to let that sink in. Then he spoke again, as I'm sure you can imagine, he refused. Naturally. I'm assuming Miriam had to fight his way out of her domain then. Much to his surprise, the priest shook his head in the negative, no, apparently just seeing the devastated look on his face was enough for her. The fourth most dangerous of the dead apostle ancestors shook his head in disgust. Altrouge truly was a disgusting creature, embodying every dark, disgusting facet of the dead apostles and none of what made them unique. Not like Arcuade. The priest stopped in front of a door saying, "We've arrived." Turning to his two silent tagalongs, Zelretch said, "Let me do all the talking, okay? The situation right now is a bit volatile." Seeing them nod, he motioned for the king of rats to open the door, which he did with a flourish. The room beyond had a red and green checkered motif. In the center of the room sat a coffee table with a motley colored tablecloth covering it that had a silver tea set placed upon it. The upholstery was predominantly a sizable overstuffed couch upon which 3 women sat. On the far left was a blue-haired priestess in a cassock. In the center was a cerulean blue-eyed redhead with long flowing strands of crimson hair, wearing tattered jeans, a white top with black sleeves that didn't seem to be connected to the rest of her apparel, and brown sneakers on her feet. She gave off a knowledgeable yet kind air. The last of the trio had long black hair that fell in tresses down her back, aquamarine eyes shined like jewels in a pale heart-shaped face. She wore a long red trench coat, leaving it open, revealing the beige turtleneck, offset by a black skirt and matching leggings. A pair of sturdy brown riding boots covered her legs up to her calves. Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine upon seeing these women congregated in one place. His danger senses, honed by months of combat with both of his teachers, were screaming at him that these women were dangerous. Yet at the same time, they all gave off a feeling of an older sister or teacher. All in all, Izuku felt wary but hoped that if he didn't do anything to antagonize them, he would be fine. That hope went up in smoke the moment the woman with jewels for eyes noticed the tome in his hands. Eyes narrowing into slits, Tosaka Rin pointed at the book she knew full well belonged to someone who had recently died. With an undercurrent of danger in her tone she asked, "Where did you get that book, little boy?" Izuku gulped strong, forcing his fear down, attempting to answer. But before he could, Zelretch did it for him, saying, "I gave it to him." The woman was on her feet in an instant, her face a visage of anger, pain, and sadness, as she demanded, "What gives you the right to give away something like that?" Before she could go off on a full tirade, the redhead stood and placed a hand on the other's shoulder, while fixing Zelretch with a wary gaze, telling her, "Rin, remember just who you are speaking to." The angry older woman, Rin, opened her mouth, likely to say she didn't care, only to stop, close her mouth with an audible clack, and nod before taking a shuddering breath. Putting on the fakest cheery smile he'd ever seen, she asked in a voice that was so sweet it sounded poisonous, "Sensei, would you mind explaining in no uncertain terms why you gave Shiro's notebook on his magecraft to that boy?" Placing a hand behind his back and forcing him to stand by his side, the wizard marshal proclaimed, "I have been fulfilling Amiya's last will. I found his successor. Say hello to Izukumidoriya, everyone." The silence and tension could have been cut with a knife. Then there was a flurry of noise and activity. The women abruptly stood and began shouting and grabbing at him all at the same time. They were all forced back into their seats by his aunt's psychokinetic abilities. Floating in the air before them like a wrathful goddess, she said, "Hands off my nephew, you crazy beaches." Turning to the grinning dead apostle ancestor, she demanded, "You, explanation, now." "Ahem." A young masculine voice called out from Izuku's left. Glancing over, he found an older boy with chin-length straight black hair and facial features that looked so perfect, it seemed wrong somehow. As if he were a painting brought to life. Pale skin, high cheekbones, eyes a dark blue like the unknown depths of the ocean. He wore a billowing white and gold-trimmed cassock that almost went down to his knees. Simple black pants of high quality and matching martial artist's shoes covered his lower half. The only odd thing about him besides his flawless appearance was the fact that he was missing his left arm in totality. The young man smiled at Izuku kindly before giggling a little, "Ah, I never get tired of seeing that look on someone's face." Izuku, blushing in embarrassment, stammered out, "Sorry about that. Who are you?" Miriam Solomon, 20th of the dead apostle ancestors, the third member of the burial agency, and collector of magical antiques. At your service. He narrowed his eyes more in contemplation than malice and asked, so, you are Shiro-san's successor, Izuku-chan? Said boy nodded silently, gulping as the older boy gave him a once-over as if silently appraising him like he were a new piece he was seeking to add to his already massive collection. Finally, he nodded in satisfaction, yes, I'm sure you'll do nicely once you're up to snuff. Miriam turned to the priest and said, my left arm, why don't you take Midoriya-chan to get some pizza and gelato while we adults talk about boring things? Bowing grandiosely at the waist, the priest replied, come on young man, I know an excellent place just down the road. Now hang on just a second. Tatsumaki objected, why should I let you take him anywhere? Are you calling me a pefli? The priest asked, his smile and tone not changing in the slightest. This caused the Esper to blink her mouth slightly agape for a moment before she said, wah, no, but I don't even know you. I can't just let you walk out of here with him. Miss, Miriam said, directing his ire her way, I assure you, Izuku-chan will be perfectly safe with the priest. I have ways of remaining in constant contact with them both. While he doesn't have to leave, I just figured he would be bored with our discussion. You may go with him if you wish, but then you would miss out on what's going on here, you'd regret that, wouldn't you? Tatsumaki bit her lower lip. Yes, she wanted to know what was going on with her nephew, but she also wanted to be sure of his safety. She snapped her fingers, coming up with a solution. Floating over to him she said, this might feel a little weird, but don't fight it, okay? Before he could as much as nod, Izuku felt like a worm was burrowing into his brain, but as she requested, he didn't push back against it. Finally, after several uncomfortable moments, the worm stopped wriggling, for which he gave a mental sigh of relief. That feels better, huh? Izuku jumped slightly upon hearing his aunt's voice in his own head. Tentatively he spoke in his thoughts, asking, Tatsumaki Obiesan. Seeing her smile and nod, she told him through telepathy, yep, I made a psychic connection to you. That way, I'll be able to keep track of you. I'll teach you to block my thoughts later, but for right now, just go get something to eat. But if he tries anything, I'll let you know. He promised. Turning to the priest, he said, I'm ready to go when you are, sir. To which, the king of rats smiled and replied, oh good. You're in for quite a treat, young man. The pizza at Pizzerium Bonsi is the best in all of Vatican City. Izuku commented offhandedly, I've never had pizza before, is it any? Noticing the borderline horrified look on the priest's face he asked, Sir, are you okay? Never had pizza before. The king of rats said aghast. He then put a hand on the boy's shoulder saying seriously, don't worry my son, this travesty will be fixed forthwith. He then proceeded to drag him off, leaving an utterly bewildered group behind him. Turning to the young man, Tatsumaki asked, should I be worried for his safety? Chuckling, Miriam replied, oh no, he's harmless. He just really loves pizza. Probably thinks it's a crime Midoriya-chan's never had it before now. Letting out a sigh of relief, the Esper turned her gaze to the wizard marshal and said, you were explaining the mess you got my nephew into? The eyes of everyone in the room filled with hostile intent as they locked onto the slayer of Type Moon. Giving an awkward laugh he said, hee hee, thanks for throwing me under the bus. Look, it's like this. Izuku bit back a curse as the priest asked him a question. He'd been telepathically listening in on the conversation through the link he now shared with his aunt. It was surprisingly easy to adapt to such a thing, as he could easily differentiate between his thoughts and feelings and that of his aunt. Masking his slight annoyance, he politely asked the priest to repeat himself. What would you like on your pizza? The king of rats repeated kindly, yet he had a smirk on his face. As if he knew what the boy before him had been thinking moments prior. Shrugging, Izuku replied, having never had it before, I'll have what you're having. Excellent, 1 medium capicola, bologna, and meatball and extra cheese with a pitcher of soda it is then. Izuku nodded absently, attempting to re-establish the connection he'd had with his aunt prior, but she seemed to have willing blocked it off on her end. Hearing a snicker coming from the priest, the green-haired boy turned his way only for the elderly man to point and explain, "If you really want answers, you needn't look any further than that book you were given." Looking down at the thick LTHR-bound journal that he'd kept in his arms even during the commotion earlier. Hesitantly, he reached for the clasp that held it shut before pressing the button and attempting to apply pressure to open it to no avail. Looking at the priest questioningly, he smirked and replied, "Do you honestly think he'd just let anyone get at his magical notes so easily? How do I get it open it then? Remember, you're his successor, you have something everyone else doesn't." Frowning, Izuku decided to try running some of his OD through the locking mechanism, as it was the only thing he could think of. Much to his surprise, he heard a slight click signifying that his guess was correct. Undoing the clasp, he opened the tome to the front page and found a note addressed to him. "To my successor. If you're reading this, then my plan paid off, and Zelretch found someone willing to become a real hero. One who wishes to help people only for the sake of doing so with no thought of reward or repayment. Firstly, I would like to thank you, for being either brave enough or foolish enough, to pick up where I left off. This is a strong road you've chosen to walk, a thankless one full of blood, sweat, and tears. Hopefully what little knowledge I have written down here can ease your burden if only a little bit. However, before we get down to that, I would like to tell you something important. No matter what people might say to you, on the contrary, it's not wrong to want to help others who are in a tight spot. It may be stupid and reckless, but so long as you are doing so to protect others' smiles, I think it's okay. Always believe that, and know that I believe in you, as if I didn't you wouldn't be reading this. Best of luck, Amiya Shiro." Izuku sniffled upon finishing the introductory note. Finally, someone who understood. That need not be weak, to protect other people. He had once felt like he'd found an older brother or a kindred soul and aggrieved at the thought of not being able to meet him in person. Rubbing his eyes to clear away the rapidly forming tears, his face formed into one of resolve. He would do his best to live up to Amiya-san's expectations so that the man could rest comfortably in the afterlife. "Order number 33, order number 33 is ready," one of the cooks called. "Ah, that's us. I'll be right back," the priest promised. As he got up and walked towards the counter, the world was suddenly tinged a shade of bright blue. Looking around at the strange phenomena, he found everyone around him was frozen in place. People walking down the street had stopped mid-stride. A flock of pigeons in mid-flight from being playfully chased by a dog were still like statues. Even jets from a nearby water fountain had ceased to move, the individual droplets looking like diamonds hanging in midair. "What's going on?" he questioned. He didn't know whether to be awed or afraid, as he didn't know who did this or what their reasons were. Was a mage planning some mischief, a robbery? Did someone with abilities similar to a quirk appear and seek to cause trouble? He didn't know, and that's what had him on edge. The hammer was pulled back in his mind, ready to fire both Hocho Toshiro and Tsuruga Masamune into his hands at a moment's notice. "Don't worry, that was me." Looking past the fleeing flock of pigeons, he saw her approaching, giving him a friendly little wave as she did. It was the redhead, her long tresses swing side to side with her gait, the glow coming from whatever she did seemed to shine off her equally blue eyes, making them appear ethereal in nature. Despite knowing who did this, it did little to set him at ease. In fact, if anything, it made him leery of her, but also curious as to how her ability functioned. Stopping in front of him, she noted he was tense. Sighing, she bowed at the waist and said, "I'm so sorry for my brash behavior earlier. It really is inexcusable. We probably scared you half to death, and you had no idea what was going on. You didn't deserve that. Think you can find it in your heart to forgive me, little man?" She looked up at him, smiling hopefully. Little man, he didn't mind the nickname, he supposed. Nodding, he said, "Sure, but I have some questions. I hope you'll be willing to answer them." He finished by unwittingly reaching for one of the notebooks he kept on him at all times, a pen held in the spine. Sitting across from him and crossing her legs over the other as if preparing for an interview, she said primly, "Shoot, little man." Izuku started with an easy question, "What's your name?" A look of surprise crossed her face before she bopped herself in the head and said, "I didn't introduce myself, did I? I'm Aozaki Aoko, it's nice to meet you, Midoriya-chan." "Aoko-chan," he said, testing it out more than asking a question. Clearing her throat, the magician requested, "Actually, I'd prefer it if you didn't call me by my name." Cocking his head to the side, Izuku asked, "Why, more importantly, what am I supposed to call you?" Glancing around even though she knew no one could overhear them, Aoko admitted, "I dislike the color blue. In all honesty, I prefer red." Looking around at the area that was now awash and tinged with said hue, he said, "That seems a bit counterintuitive given what I've seen so far." "True." He continued, "Besides, I like the color. At least this shade. Same shade as your eyes too." "Why's that?" Aoko asked, ignoring the compliment delivered by the young boy. Children often said things without thinking after all. Izuku was at a loss. He was the type to be polite at all times, yet the person before him clearly had issues being addressed by either her last or even her first name for that matter. So he actually had to come up with a nickname for her. He was deep in thought, attempting to do just that, looking up to the sky as he replied, before I met Zelretch-san, I didn't have a lot going for me. Some days, I'd look up at the sky and see the seagulls flying. They could go wherever they want whenever they wanted. The sky was the limit for them and most people I knew. But I was stuck on the ground, normal and looked down upon by those above me. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, to me, that color represents the sky and limitless potential." No matter how strong he racked his brain, he couldn't think of anything to call her that she wouldn't possibly find offensive in some way. Sighing, he almost said as much until he saw the magician giving him an introspective sort of look. "Hope, huh?" she mulled it over. She honestly hated her name and any connection to it, but after hearing his impassioned speech, about how the sky gave him hope, Aoko couldn't help but smile a bit. Giving him a warm smile, she told him, "You can call me by my name if you like." Looking confused, he said, "But I thought dash." Reaching over and ruffling his curls, she said, "I'll make an exception for you, little man." "Fine, Aozaki-san." "Aoko-san, no need to be so formal, little man." This caused him to mutter out, Aoko-san. Giggling a little at his stutter, she said, "We'll work on it. Ready to head back, little man?" "Wait, how are you doing all of this?" He motioned to the blue tinge on everything around them. The people froze like statues. Getting up, Aoko snatched the pizza box from the hands of the eager-looking king of rats. Giving the frozen demon a smug smirk, she proceeded to walk off with his prize, his charge trailing behind her. Handing him a slice, she took one for herself, saying, "I like Zelretch, am a true magician. I use the magic dash. Magic blue, time manipulation magic." Izuku said, stopping and taking a seat on a nearby bench so he could pop open his notebook and write this down. "That's right, I suppose the old bloodsucker mentioned me then." Not directly, but he talked about the true magics, Izuku mentioned offhandedly before he took a bite of pizza. Once he did, he stopped. Aoko immediately became concerned. "What's wrong, you're not choking, are you?" Shaking his head rapidly, Izuku replied, "No, it's just that, this is really good." You've never had pizza before, have you, little man?" Aoko couldn't help but smile at the look on his face, a smile which turned into a snicker as she realized the king of rats probably wanted to see this very scene. "No, I haven't. The closest thing I can equate this to is okonomiyaki. But this is greasier. Still good though." The fifth magician agreed wholehearted with his assessment. "Yeah, this is a lot better than filled pancakes. But anyway, back to my magic. I have complete control over the flow of time. I can stop it, reverse it, and speed it up. I can use this to various effects, enhancing my speed, layering copies of myself on top of me to avoid damage, and increasing my casting speed for my spells. Just to name a few. Izuku wrote all of this in his notebook, yet he couldn't help but ask, why tell me all this? I thought mages were secretive. If I were anyone else, you'd be right. But I'm a magician. That means that I'm the only one who can use my magic until I either die or choose a successor. So it doesn't matter what I tell you. Besides, I like having such an attentive student listening to me ramble, and taking such nice notes makes me feel like a teacher. Do you want to be a teacher? Aoko sighed wistfully, perhaps if I hadn't chosen the path of the magus. I could see myself teaching a class full of eager young kids, eyes full of hope for a brighter future, kids like you. Izuku was confused. I don't understand why you can't just be a teacher like you want. Shouldn't you be allowed to follow your dreams? This earned him a sad smile. When I chose to become a magician, it was a full-time commitment. I knew that by walking this path, I would be forever sacrificing my chance at a normal life. But I was okay with that at the time. Being a magician means having a duty, I feel, to protect people, be they magical or mundane, from threats they can't even see, let alone hope to face. You did much the same upon accepting Zelretch's deal, or did you not realize? Izuku was silent for a time, mulling over her words. It was true that he accepted the wizard marshal's offer, but he did so knowing he would have the power he desired to help others. He didn't think about anything else because anything else was irrelevant in his eyes. But he was now being shown the same thing, yet from a different perspective. That magic was a duty, rather than a longing. Izuku, being Izuku, of course, saw someone in trouble and wanted to help. Well, Aozaki-san, there's a lot I don't know about magic and stuff. Where I come from, being a hero is an actual vocation. It's something people aspire to, dream about. It was and is my dream. But, if I'm to achieve that dream, I need to know more about magic. What I'm trying to ask is, can you help me? The fifth magician smiled. She knew exactly what he was trying to do. Help. As that's what the person known as a Miyashiro would have done if he was in the same position. Or so she'd been told. Honestly, she thought it a shame that she never got to meet a kindred soul in person. One that, like herself and Paracelsus of old, wished to use his magecraft to benefit the whole of mankind. Maybe this time around, she thought to herself. Okay, I'll teach you what I can, but don't expect a miracle. I'm average at pretty much everything short of my special brand of magecraft and the fifth. That's fine, it's more than I know at the moment. I suppose I should look through the journal Amiya-san left me. Look for instructions on what to do next. Then we could go from there. Aoko nodded in agreement. Sounds like a plan, but let's hold off on classes till after we deal with whatever mess Zelretch has dragged us into. Any? Sounds like a plan. Should we be getting back to the others by now, Aozaki-san? Sighing before flicking him on the nose, she said, call me Aoko, and yeah, you're right. She took him by the arm then, before saying, hold on. Izuku couldn't even finish his question before he felt his vision blur as he was forced forwards in a sudden burst of speed. The air in his lungs felt heavy, and the blood in his veins seemed to thicken, as several G's of force was exerted on his body. He could even hear his heartbeat thundering away in his ears. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped, and if he had the presence of mind to look around, he would have found himself back in Miriam's chambers. However, his only concern at the moment was finding a bucket to empty the contents of his stomach into. Bathroom is just over there. Following the dead apostle's pointing finger, his face as green as his hair, he nodded, just managing to make it to the toilet in time. As Izuku lifted his pale and shaking frame from the toilet bowl, he heard his aunt berating his new acquaintance. What the hell did you do, Blue? First, don't call me Blue, Granny. Second, the little man just isn't used to going at super speed, I guess. Oi, you alright in there? Aoko called to him. I'm good. I'm okay, really. Izuku replied before flushing the toilet. Gurgling a bit of water to cleanse his palate, he spat into the sink, before finally rejoining the rest of the group. Tatsumaki was in front of him the moment the door opened, concern for him shining in her eyes. "You're looking peaky, maybe you should stay behind and dash." "No." Izuku refused to be babied any longer. I want to do this." Seeing the stubborn look on his face, Tatsumaki couldn't help but think, he reminds me so much of his mother right now. She asked, "Why do you feel the need to do this? This could be dangerous, you could get hurt. You don't have to prove anything to me. I believe you'll be a great hero one day, with a lot more spit and polish." Shaking his head, he told her, "You know. But I do have someone to prove it to." "Who, your mother?" Tatsumaki questioned. "Believe me, you have no proving to do to her either. In fact, I think she'd be much happier if you became a simple salaryman." Sighing he said, "I know she would be. But that's just not me. The person I need to prove this to isn't you, her, or anybody else." "Then who?" Izuku continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The person I need to prove myself to, is myself. I need to prove that I really can be a hero. So DMN stubborn. I guess Izuku got something from me after all, besides the green curly hair I mean." Tatsumaki sighed in defeat. "Fine, do what you want, but please. Please don't get in over your head." Rubbing the back of his head feeling sheepish he told her, "I'll do my best." The tornado of terror glared pointedly at her nephew. "That's all I can hope for, I suppose." "Sorry," he said, taking a keen interest in his shoes. Turning away from him she locked eyes with the fifth magician. "Oi, Red, thanks for volunteering to keep an eye on him for me, I appreciate it." Though she said that, she sounded anything but grateful. Aoko put on a cheerful faux smile. "Of course, no problem." Izuku looked back and forth between the two, sensing an odd tension between the two but not knowing the exact reason why. Just as he was about to open his mouth and ask if everything is alright, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Looking up he found the woman with long black hair in red, the one who started this whole mess. "Say gently, don't, something's can't be fixed by you, no matter what you do." He looked back to the two who were still glaring at one another. "Who are you?" he asked the woman next to him. "I'm Tosaka Rin, and I feel I owe you an apology." He looked up at her to see her smiling down at him apologetically, her aquamarine eyes with shame. But in the end, Izuku just shook his head. "Don't worry about it, I can understand why you were so surprised. What was Amiya-san to you, if you don't mind my asking?" "He was a dear friend," Rin replied, sounding wistful. Izuku felt another hand land on his opposite shoulder. It was that of the priestess, who said, "I too owe you an apology." Shiro was different, compared to most magi. But different in a good way. He wanted to use what little power he had, to do good for the sake of doing good. "I was his teacher. Now, after watching that scene between you and your relative, I see Zelretch has indeed made the right choice. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Elysia." Seal's eyes were as wide as dinner plates. She wanted to ask just how he knew that name, but before she could, Miriam chimed in from his seat. "I quite agree. In fact, there is something of his I think he would want you to have." The executioner's head snapped to the dead apostles like a snake eyeing a bird. "You don't mean?" "I do," he affirmed. "Shiro would have wanted him to have it. Don't you think?" After a moment of chewing her bottom lip, Seal nodded. Silently she led him away from the still feuding magician and psychic, and off into a side room he wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been driven right to it, as it was well concealed in the shadows. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, and Seal ushered him forward into the looming darkness therein. He complied with little resistance, and the priestess followed in his wake, shutting the door behind her. He could hear her fumble in the darkness for but a moment until an audible flick of a light switch being flipped was heard. Izuku was momentarily blinded by the sudden burst of light, but when it cleared, he tried and failed to hold back a gasp. For he found himself in what appeared to be an armory. Blades and spears of all kinds hung from the walls. Fronting, the Hound of the Red Plains, its helix-shaped blade gleaming with ill intent. Its fellow blade, the blunt nagling, hung just beneath it, both of which were wielded by the Geats' hero, Beowulf. Below them was a 2-meter-long lance that looked to be made of purest mercury. It was Mac and Lewin, the spear of Finn Mac Cumhale, who used this very spear to slay the divine spirit Aelin. On the opposite wall was a great sword in the shape of a drill, the sword of the true rainbow and madness, Calidbald the blade of Fergus Mac Aroich. Under the great sword hung 2 katana, one was wrapped in purest white silk and gold, its blade gleaming like a polished mirror. This was Yawarakite, the legendary sword forged by the smith Masamune. Beneath it was a black twisted thing, its blade an inky black with a red rust hue along its edge which was chipped like the maw of some beast, its fittings that of black aged bronze and BLD red silk. This was Juchi Yasumu, the legendary masterwork of Muramasa. Directly in the center of the room, there was glass enclosed case, directly above it was a painting of a man. He was tall, with bronze tan skin, white hair, and eyes the color of steel. He was clothed in rad mantle, combat armor, what looked to be Kevlar pants and steel-toed boots. Beside him stood a black bow as long as he was tall. In his hands, he held a pair of piendao, one turtle shell black, the other cloudy white. Each the een to the other's yang. Slowly reverently, Izuku approached the case. Yet he already felt he knew what he would find within. He stopped, eyes closed in a moment of silence for the departed before finally casting his gaze into the contents of the case. The married twin swords, Kansho and Bakuya, lay crisscrossed over a crimson mantle. Next to the mantle was a folded-up pair of pants with a set of steel-toed boots resting on top. Laying at the bottom of the case was the bow. Long, black, and currently unstrung. Made of a mixture of ceramic and carbonyl, making it sturdy enough to even fire off broken phantasms. You can alter the size enough to fit you using reinforcement. Seal broke the hallowed silence. Izuku looked back at her. She had her hands clasped in front of her as if waiting for something to happen. "Are you sure it's okay for me to take this?" he asked, sounding dubious as he turned back to the case. "Shiro chose you, in his own way. We need to respect his decision, and you need to have some faith in yourself." Seal advised, giving a self-depreciating laugh at her own expense when she was finished. Izuku closed his eyes, taking a breath as he did so. When he opened them, there was no hesitation, no doubt, nor any fear reflected back in the glass. Just firm resolve to see this task, whatever it was, through to the end. Without turning around, he said, "Please leave so I can get changed." Seal left with a small smile on her usually impassive face. When he was finally to step outside of the little memorial room, Izuku felt, for lack of a better term, ready. The apparel of his forebear, once he downsized it to fit his slimmer frame, fit him almost like a second skin. It felt right, as if he'd been wearing them for years. He wondered if he was passively absorbing the imprinted memories in the hand-me-down clothes, but decided not to think about it too much. "Okay, let's do this," he thought to psyche himself up before he turned the handle and stepped outside. The moment he did, all eyes turned to him. He did his best not to swallow the nervous lump that had formed in his throat, instead, asking, "How do I look?" Aoko had to admit, he cut a fine figure in his new black, red, and gray ensemble. The crimson shroud of Martin of Tours clung to his arms and hung from his waist, while the black and silver armor, from what she was told was crafted from fullerene carbon nanotubes and ceramics, the pants and boots were both reinforced with Kevlar and steel. Tatsumaki floated close and gave him a once-over before adjusting his pants slightly so that they weren't askew and saying, "Looking good, kiddo." Zelretch gave an approving nod, ready to hear what we'll be up to, kid. Before Izuku could answer, the door suddenly burst open, and an enraged king of rats stood in the entryway looking murderous. "Where is my pizza?" Aoko unapologetically handed the divine beast the box, all the while chewing on a slice of greasy, cheesy goodness. Shooting her a venomous look, the king of rats proceeded to devour the rest of the pizza, pausing briefly to offer Izuku a slice which he declined, much to the king's melancholy. In the silence that followed, Miriam sighed and said, "I wish you wouldn't embarrass me so, my left arm." A pause before, "You were saying Zelretch?" Zelretch cleared his throat, banishing the awkward air, "Ahem, right. Well anyway." A sadistic grin appeared as he asked, "Have any of you ever heard of the infinity gems? Time. Space. Reality. Mind. Power. Soul. These 6 concepts, each embodied by a single gemstone, and thus, had absolute control over that which they claimed dominion. Each granted the power fit for a god, and when wielded together could subdue the very gods themselves. Or so Zelretch had explained to him and everyone else present. Izuku was still trying to wrap his head around the idea of such stones existing in the first place. How someone completely ordinary could become close to godlike just by owning one of these gemstones. For someone who grew up powerless in a world of people with powers, the fact that people can gain such strength so easily felt wrong to him on a fundamental level. So much so that he almost missed what he said next as he continued his disbelieving mutterings. Anyways, the current holders of the infinity gems are as follows. Blackagar, Black Bolt, Boltagan, king of the genetically modified humans known as the Inhumans, who live in the blue area of the moon. A section of the moon that has its own ozone pocket. He holds the purple space gem. He can vibrate his own molecules, giving himself super strength, durability, and senses. But his most dangerous power is his voice. When he speaks, the earth itself shakes. Izuku shakily raised his hand before saying, "There's a section of the moon with its own atmosphere here." He was more surprised to learn of this than this Black Bolt's abilities at the moment, even if he was writing them down at a fevered pace. To which the wizard marshal nodded and replied, "This is a completely different from your own kid, get used to hearing weird things." Izuku nodded and proceeded to take notes on everything Zelretch had to say. "Ah, now where was I?" "You just finished talking about the space gem," Miriam supplied. The holder of the second magic nodded, now back on track, right. Moving on. Next, we have Professor Charles Xavier, headmaster of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. A boarding school that is a training facility for people with mutant powers. The best of their best is a group called the X-Men. They are the closest thing you have to quirk users here. Xavier himself is the most powerful telepath on the planet without the blue mind gem that he has in his possession. "Why do you keep telling us what colors they are?" Tatsumaki asked, eyes narrowed in annoyance. Raising an eyebrow, he retorted, "Well, how else are you going to know what it looks like?" Resisting the urge to smile as his aunt rolled her eyes and huffed. Izuku continued taking notes. The reality gem is yellow and is in the hands of Anthony Stark, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, inventor, and genius. He has no powers, but with his money and intellect, he doesn't need any. With PhDs in pretty much anything to do with machines, electronics, and sciences. With the reality gem in his hands, if he can think it up, he can make it real. Even without it, he's created an army of robotic armor suits. Izuku's face paled at the thought of a super genius with a reality warping gem in his possession. Waiting for a beat seemingly to allow Izuku to finish taking his notes, Zelretch continued, "Namor the submariner, the king of Atlantis, holds the yellow time gem. Due to his Atlantean physiology, he can lift 50 tons dry, but if submerged in water, that amount can more than double. He can also breathe underwater, telekinetically control it, and telepathically talk to sea life. Oh, and he an army of fellow Atlanteans standing between us, him, and the gem." For a moment no one spoke, then Aoko finally said what was on all their minds, "You have got to be going senile, you rotting corpse. You expect us to take on 2 kingdoms, a super genius, and a telepath who likely know we're coming for him if he's as strong as you say he is. Just how do you expect us to pull this off? Wait, it gets better. Dr. Stephen Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme of that universe, is the possessor of the Orange Soul Gem, allowing him to control the souls of the living and the dead on top of his status as Sorcerer Supreme. Aoko spoke up again, this time her voice tinged with anger, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. What exactly do you mean by Sorcerer Supreme? Exactly as it sounds, so long as we are in that dimension, he is the strongest magician there. He can fight on par with gods and can borrow their power for a time. Even our magic is not outside his grasp so long as we remain in reality. M616. The fifth magician bolted to her feet, mouth twisted into an angry snarl, and prepared to verbally and perhaps physically rip her fellow magician apart, only to stop when she felt a small hand grasp her wrist. Glancing down, she found Izuku's big green eyes staring up into hers from where he sat sandwiched in between his aunt and herself. Aozaki-san, I think Zelretch-san has a plan. Oh, and what makes you say that, Izuku-kun? Taking a deep shuddering breath, the youngest member of the group began his explanation. Well, from what Zelretch-san has said, he's only the most powerful magician in that dimension. All you need to do is get him out of that dimension to level the playing field. Since Zelretch-san specializes in making portals, it stands to reason that all you need to do is get him in one. Preferably after getting the soul gem from him. In fact, the best way to go about it would be if Zelretch-san and Aozaki-san blitzed him before he could do anything. Excellent idea, kiddo, what else you got? Zelretch encouraged the boy to continue. Well, I'm not sure what Tosaka-san, Solomon-san, and Seal-san can do so. The trio paused as if deciding who would be the first to answer the boy's silent query. Miram shrugged his remaining shoulder before deciding to humor him. You have already seen some of what I'm capable of. He motioned to the priest with his remaining arm before pointing to the missing one and elaborating, each of my limbs is actually a divine beast. A demon of the millennial rank, like the king of rats there. Demon? Izuku squeaked out, now eyeing the priest warily. Easy, the priest said kindly, I'm on the side of humanity as long as they continue to make pizza. Clearing his throat, Miram continued, yes, well, moving on. Besides my left arm, I have my right arm, Lady Windup. A 10-meter-tall mechanoid fit with all manner of conventional weaponry, which also doubles as a fortress. She is rather bullheaded though, so I don't like using her. My left leg, King of the Sky, is a 200-meter, rainbow-colored manta ray. My most appealing creation, if I do say so myself. Seeing the hurt look his left arm was giving him, Miram added, with my left arm being my smartest. He rounded off his assessment of his abilities by talking of his right leg. My right leg is the black whale dog. He's as big as my left leg, and acts like a giant puppy, if a giant puppy destroyed everything around it simply by existing. Did you get all that, Midoriya-chan? Why yeah, I think it would be best if Solomon-san acted as a distraction while the others took the gems, or send him up against this Tony Stark directly, as he doesn't seem subtle. Miram smiled, yet it caused a shiver to run down the young boy's spine, as that smile showed both the eagerness for battle and inflicting pain. Seal went next. I specialize in hunting and subduing mages, vampires, and other things deemed undesirable by the church. I have an inhuman amount of prana, and utilize black keys as conduits for my magecraft. Plans began forming in his mind, and Izuku started an incessant muttering, okay then, so maybe send her after this Dr. Strange. I think Zelretch-san could handle this black bolt on his own easily enough, but it would probably be best to send him after Namor. Teleport him someplace hot and dry, no water, no sea life, no backup, and he's lost more than half of his advantages right there. Plus I'm sure he has measures for dealing with super strength. Aozaki-san should probably deal with Black Bolt. Freeze him in place, no shouting, then take the gem. Easy. His head suddenly snapped up, and he said, Tosaka-san, what are you bringing to the table? Rin noticed the glint in his eyes and the near grin on his face. It didn't frighten her per se, but it made her wonder if there was more to the boy before her than she first assumed. I can do jewel craft, no kenpo, and some curses. Jewel craft? Magical hand grenades. Zelretch supplied with little fanfare, earning a scowl from his apprentice. Izuku nodded, and the last gem holder? Mr. Fantastic. Holds the red power gem which grants power in all its forms. From super strength to energy blasts. He also has a RBB physiology, meaning he can bend and stretch his body at will. He leads a 4-person superhero team consisting of himself, his wife, Susan, who can turn invisible and create force fields, his brother-in-law Johnny, who can set himself on fire, and his best friend Ben, who is a rock creature of some kind. Think you can handle that, Tosaka? The heir to the house of Tosaka frowned. Not because this boy doubted her skills, but because he had such a determined yet resigned look on his face. Amiya too sported such a look, quite often, when he knew conflict was on the horizon. When he knew, no matter what he did, people were going to be hurt. Just how good a job did her mentor do, picking this boy as the successor to Amiya's magecraft? She mentally shuddered at the thought. Collecting her wits, she replied, I should be able to handle myself just fine. Good, good. That leaves Tatsuo Byasen and I to deal with this Xavier person. No. Tatsumaki's voice rang out sharp and clear, Red is staying here with you, and you aren't going anywhere, young man. But Izuku tried to protest only to be cut off by his diminutive aunt. No buts. You aren't ready for something like this. You haven't even been to a hero academy yet, and if something happened to you, your mother would kill me. Izuku pointed out a well-known fact, but, you're stronger than her. To this, Tatsumaki let out a mirthless chuckle, yes, but do you think that will matter to her if she finds out I let something happen to you? Her voice softened, losing its usual harshness as she finished, her eyes silently pleading, do you think I'll even try to stop her, should that happen? Izuku clenched his teeth in frustration, but in the end, he exhaled all the strength, seemingly leaving him as he did. Fine, he said, you win, I'll stay here with Aozaki-san. Tatsumaki hated hearing him sounding so despondent, but it was for his own good, she reasoned. Yet she paused then. She often thought she was doing things for her sister's own good back when they were both active heroes, but all she ended up doing was alienating her and pushing her away. Was she doing the same thing here, right now, with her nephew? She didn't want to take that chance. So she decided to do something she rarely did and opened up around strangers. I'm doing this for your own good, you know that, right? I don't want you getting hurt. I just want to help. He said, bemoaning his luck. While he knew his aunt was doing what she was with the best of intentions, the fact remained that he had this urge, this motivation, this innate longing to help people in any way he could. Being told he couldn't. He may as well be ordered not to breathe. Tatsumaki sighed. She knew he meant well, that the instincts of a hero were well ingrained within him, perhaps too well, with how altruistic he seemed to be. But the fact remained that he wasn't ready for this, and she as his guardian at the moment needed to put her foot down. But that didn't mean she couldn't do that as gently as possible. For once she decided to try tact. I know you want to help. When it comes to helping, you're downright insane, but you've done enough this time. We've got plans thanks to you, and that's enough. It doesn't feel like enough. What happens when something goes wrong? Bang Sensei told me no plan survives contact with the enemy. So what will you do when that happens? Tatsumaki scowled. DMN it, you old fogey, why'd you go teaching him things like that? She told him, then we'll just have to improvise. When he opened his mouth to argue some more, she gently placed her hands on his shoulders, forcing him to look her in the eyes. She decided since tact didn't work, and being blunt didn't work, she'd try brutal honesty. Look, Izuku, whether you like to admit it or not, you're not ready for this. You know it, and I know it. He looked away, but she continued, that's why you're staying here. But, that said, I believe that in the future, you'll be a great hero, probably the greatest. His gaze snapped back to her. wide-eyed, even greater than All Might. Tatsumaki had to resist the urge to scoff at the buffoon they called the symbol of peace. Yes, I know that with enough dedication you'll be better than him someday. But not today. Izuku finished sighing as if resigned. Not today, she finished by ruffling his curly hair, causing him to give a wan smile. Now lighten up. While we're away, you can go over that book the old man forgot to give you. Izuku nodded, a plan silently already forming in his mind. Satisfied that her charge was going to stay out of trouble, Tatsumaki took charge and started divvying up orders. So we have our targets, and a general strategy, let's get moving people. What about the space gem? Tosaka asked. I'll go after it before getting the last one, it shouldn't be too tough. The Esper replied. Zelretch clapped his hands together, drawing everyone's attention. Well, it seems our fated battles have been decided. Why is there a dry erase board with a tournament ladder on it behind you? Izuku questioned. Never mind that, before we head off, both Izuku and Tatsumaki need to put these on. Zelretch held up 2 necklaces, on the end of each hung an octahedron-shaped crystal, its depths glowing every hue of the rainbow. Tatsumaki looked at them and arched an eyebrow. Okay, I'll bite, why the hippie jewelry? Rin, explain, Zelretch commanded. Stepping forward, Rin put one hand on her hips, held up her other arm, index finger outstretched, and began her lecture. These are nodes, used to lock in your multiversal time in place. Seeing the looks she was getting, Tosaka explained, every dimension has its own time zone. Going from one to the other without some form of protection can have disastrous consequences. The transition to this universe wasn't too difficult. The speed of this universe is probably 12 hours ahead of your homeverse. Meaning every 12 hours you spend here, a day passes back home for you. But in M616, it moves a lot faster, 25 times faster than this dimension to be exact. If you go in without protection and then go home, the corrective forces of your world could do a number on you both. Izuku quickly did the math in his head. That means for every day we spend over there 12 days pass back home. Oh man, Mom is gonna be so mad at me for skipping school. Rin nodded, exactly. Now can you imagine hours of combat magnified by a factor of 25 times a factor of days being applied to your bodies all at once? 'Cause that's what would happen if you went back to your home universe without one of these. The two looked at each other and nodded before stretching out their arms for the pendants, which they promptly threw around their necks. A multi-hued portal opened, and the group made their way through to another world. They found themselves in a lavish open apartment, stained wood floors, stainless steel appliances, and furniture made of stitched black LTHR. One whole wall was made of thick glass and gave a breathtaking view of a bustling city filled with skyscrapers. The sound of people milling about, the incessant sound of car horns, and even the occasional dog barking could be heard. Izuku could only marvel at the view. Everything seemed so small from up here. It reminded him of home, yet it was more crowded than even he was used to growing up in the city of Atami of the Shizuoka prefecture like he did. His gaze was torn away from the view, the sound of many pairs of feet shuffling in one direction. Everyone sans Aozaki-san was heading towards the front door. It was now that it hit home for him. That others, people he knew, were going to go out and risk their lives, and he was expected to just sit back and let it happen. A fire burned in his gut at the thought of one of them being hurt because he wasn't there to help. He had half a mind to sneak out after them right now, but stopped when he felt Aozaki-san's hand come to rest on his shoulder. He looked up at her, and she gave him a half-hearted smile. But he could tell her heart wasn't in it. That she too wanted to be out there keeping the others safe. You can go with them if you want, he told her honestly. And leave you here by yourself when we both know you wouldn't stay put? No, I don't think so. Come on, let's see what that tome of yours has to say. He sighed, doing his best to ignore every nerve in his being that was screaming at him to get out there. It wasn't time yet. Soon, soon. He told himself as he sat down on the plush LTHR sofa and began the painstaking process of unlocking the secrets left to him by his forebear. Tatsumaki stepped out of the portal provided for her and looked around. Adeline, the floating kingdom of the Inhumans, was a maze of tightly packed streets and looming skyscrapers. She stood in one of many narrow alleyways, one that was thankfully not in use at the time. Taking to the air, she quickly got a bird's-eye view of the entire city. A massive hexagon-shaped wall several hundred feet in height completely surrounded the urban metropolis. At every point in the hexagon there was a dome of some kind. If she had to hazard a guess, it was a barracks where troops and other things were housed in case of an external threat. Even the city itself was split into 5 sections. Spires looming to and fro, all pointing like arrows on all sides to a single building. It could be nothing less than a palace. It was big, gaudy, distinguished looking, and it was in the center of everything else. Her plan was simple. Go and find this black blot guy, ask him to hand over the gem. If he refused, take it by force. Considering what she'd been told about his abilities, Tatsumaki knew she could take him, but the psychokinetic also knew it would be annoyingly difficult to do so. Humph, I guess I'll just hope for the best and prepare for the worst, like always. With that thought in mind, she shot off towards the building. Seeing a sizable open portcullis that likely acted as a window, she dove into it. Looking down, she found she was in a throne room. It was a vast open space with a small raised space upon which 2 thrones sat. Upon one was a fit, pale-skinned woman with red hair that was so long, it cascaded down the sides of her chair and pooled at her feet. The man, by contrast, was ripped, wearing what looked to be some type of hero costume consisting of a black leotard with matching gloves, boots and cowl. 2 silver lightning bolts trailed down either side of his chest, across his arms, and down his legs. What looked to be a tuning fork was attached to the front of his cowl. She noted he had a bat-like wing apparatus under his arms, allowing him a means of flight. She could also see him looking right at her, motioning her to come down, meaning her hopes of this being a smash and grab were blown. So much for this being quick and easy, she thought, floating towards the silent king and stopping when she was but a foot off the floor. The redhead spoke for the both of them. My husband would like to know who you are and what you are doing here. I am curious myself. Who I am doesn't really matter. Why I'm here does. I want the infinity gem in his possession. Tatsumaki finished by pointing a finger at the inhuman sovereign. Medusa's eyes widened before narrowing, and her head snapped to her husband, her crimson locks taking on a life of their own as they began to float around her. Blackagar, what is she talking about? Surely you would tell me if you had an infinity gem of all things, yes. He refused to answer either via telepathy or their unique brand of sign language. Blackagar. Black Bolt looked downcast. His queen raged at him. I can't believe you would keep something like this from me. An infinity gem of all things, here on Adeline. Where on earth did you get it? How long have you had it? Why dash? Oi! Tatsumaki yelled, interrupting the impromptu inquisition and returning the focus to herself. I don't suppose pointing out how dangerous it is keeping something like that will convince you to hand it over, huh? In response, Black Bolt took to his feet. The sound of him cracking his knuckles echoed throughout the chamber. Tatsumaki sighed. I didn't think so, but you can't blame me for trying, I guess. She huffed. Humph, okay, let's get this over with quickly. I need to go after another one once I'm finished with you, so I don't have all dash. Silence. It was a whisper, but it came out like a thunderclap. A bubble of force tore up the cement like a stampede of rampaging bulls and slammed into the tiny Esper, sending her through several buildings before she finally came to a stop buried under a pile of rubble. Rubble that was covered in a green glow before it was tossed aside, revealing the irate woman beneath. People were fleeing en masse around her. But that suited the tornado just fine. She was a hero, after all. Harming civilians was against her sensibilities. Which is why she scanned the skyscraper she'd landed behind thoroughly for any signs of human life before she telekinetically lifted the entire thing and threw it at Black Bolt, the weather vane atop it. Black Bolt's eyes widened, surprised at the display of this unknown child. Only Jean Grey of the X-Men could produce a similar feat, he thought, as several tons of steel glass and concrete came hurtling towards him. Stop! Again a whisper echoed like the scream of the colossal beast, turning the building into so much dust. Dust which obscured his vision as shards of glass and metal came rocketing out of the murky cloud. They impacted his skin with the force of high-caliber bullets to no effect. His inhuman biology granted him superhuman endurance and strength enough to lift several tons. DMN, you're more stubborn than most, I'll give you that. Try this on for size. Tatsumaki called out through the haze, moments before a torrent of flame 3 meters high and 12 across threatened to consume king and queen both. Pyrokinesis, the ability to create flames with one's mind, was a bit of a misnomer. What it really was a tactile use of telekinesis, causing enough friction in the air to make it burn and then growing and directing the flame. That is what Tatsumaki was doing now. The spout of flame pushing down on her foe with all the force of a rocket engine. Yet despite all that, she could feel him slowly but steadily making his way towards her, forcing the intense flames back through some unknown method. So she tossed chunks of the street, each the size of a small boulder, at him. It didn't impede him in the slightest as they disintegrated into nothing well before coming into contact with his being. Hoping to gain some distance from this seemingly unstoppable force of nature the mad vampire had sent her up against, she charged the electrons in the air and sent a concentrated barrage of lightning against him. The Esper flew back several meters, hoping that several billion volts would succeed where all else had failed. She pulled out her ace in the hole then. Slowly at first but rapidly picking up speed, she began spinning the air around her at speeds well beyond any tornado. It ignited, but this time it was more than just a flame. Black Bolt blinked in surprise. For it was not every day a telepath created a veritable tower of plasma. It burned as bright as any star in the sky, white hot, and dangerous, to anyone but him. Enough. He raised his voice above a whisper, just as the child swung her makeshift weapon. The electron-charged pulse that he emitted clashed with the lance of plasma briefly before it was torn apart, the superheated gas spewing out every which way. A monster, he's got to be some kind of inhuman monster. Tatsumaki thought as she watched him walk calmly through the all-consuming blaze. In that moment of fear, Black Bolt struck. Like a lioness hunting a gazelle on the savannah, he darted in, hitting strong and fast. Jaw, knee, stomach, and temple. All were struck in quick succession, and even with her barrier up, Tatsumaki felt as if she had just been hit by a freight train. Her small body skipped across the pavement, rolling to a stop some feet away. Pushing herself to her knees on shaky arms, Tatsumaki, the tornado of terror for the first time since being saved by blast from MK Omega, felt well and truly hopeless and worst of all, helpless. She hated feeling like that. Weak, helpless, defenseless. She promised herself she'd never feel like that again. Rage bubbled up inside her, towards this mutant who was calmly stalking towards her. She looked at her hands. Scuffed up and bloodied for the first time in ages. He was getting closer. Get away. He kept coming. Get away. He was drawing closer still. She locked eyes with him. Black Bolt saw both primal rage and animalistic fear staring back at him as she yelled out, "Get away from me." There was a sudden flash of green. When Tatsumaki blinked away the spots, she found everything covered in a verdant hue. The people, the buildings, even the air itself had a neon green tint to it. Looking to her attacker, she saw he was frozen mid-stride, seemingly unable to move. Tentatively the small woman got to her feet, ignoring the growing pounding ache in her skull. She slowly circled around him like a cat would a mouse. Stopping in front of him, she waved a hand in his face. Getting no reaction, she snapped her fingers a couple of times. Nothing. It was as if he had been turned to stone. The Esper had no idea what she'd just done, but she was not one to waste the opportunity, and began to trek past him preparing to ransack his palace to locate the infinity gem. Then she felt the ground shake, ever so slightly beneath her feet. It was the tiniest of tremors, but it was enough to make her stop, pause, and turn ever so slowly towards her opponent. Black Bolt's entire body was vibrating. Gradually but increasing at a steady pace. The ground began to shake around him, and lightning crackled in the air, surrounding his form. Then, an almighty crack like that of a starting pistol being fired, rent the air as Blackagar Boltagon began to move. Her emerald eyes becoming doe-like, Tatsumaki could only mutter, "How on dash." That was as far as she got before he was upon her. She felt her jaw crack as he delivered a punishing blow to her face. Her back arched as she slammed through a steel wall. Looking around, half dazed, and in pain, she found she was back in the palace. Her body ached, she could taste the iron tang of blood in her mouth, and all she wanted to do was rest. But to do so here, now, meant death. The ache in her head mounted to near blinding levels, and the green tinge on everything began to fade. That was when she noticed. A boy, likely no older than 18, was about to be crushed under falling debris made by her impromptu entrance into this part of the palace. She didn't think. She didn't need to. It was reflex after so many years on the job. Fighting through the pain both in her skull and radiating through the rest of her body, the Esper used her telekinesis to push the debris away from the innocent, saving him from harm. That was it. She was spent, empty, out of gas. The ache in her skull had become sharp and agonizing. She felt so tired. Her eyes began to droop. Tatsumaki just needed to rest. Blackagar gently floated down in front of this would-be thief. He had questions. So many questions. Where did she come from? How did she know he possessed an infinity stone? Was she working for someone or a part of some group? If so, what were their goals? He shook his head, deciding questions could wait until she woke up. After all, anyone would go out of their way to save an innocent couldn't be entirely evil. The fact that she had unknowingly saved his son, Ahura, even though he was in no danger, made him think she was more than what she appeared. Thus it was with great care that he lifted her limp form and carried her off to receive medical attention. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 3. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author bubbajack on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.